Hey there, welcome back to Coding at Home with the Code Hub. Hi, I'm Matt from the Code Hub. I've been taking you through Everyone Can Code Puzzles, the book from Apple, the relatively new book from Apple on the iBook store that takes you through all of the Learn to Code 1 and Learn to Code 2 fundamentals of programming with Swift. Great introduction to the language. I don't need to tell you this. We've been going through it for a few weeks now. And we finally finished off the exercises in the book yesterday. And I did leave you hanging. I had you working on a few homework assignments to do with removing values from an array, manipulating arrays, iterating through them. We're going to walk through those today, have a little bit of a wrap up, and then we're going to talk about what we're going to do next. So before we get back into the Swift Playgrounds, though, I want to say that if you've made it this far, you've learned a ton about programming. Even if you don't feel like you have and you feel like you've struggled with a lot of the exercises, you've actually, just by working through it and trying things out, maybe trying to write a little bit of code using the autocomplete bar, you've actually gone a long way to starting becoming a programmer. And maybe Learn to Code 1 and 2 aren't your thing. Maybe you don't mind whether or not byte gets the gems or toggles the switches. You don't see the point in doing that. We're going to work through some other playgrounds and some other coding exercises that maybe you will find more attractive. So make sure you follow us on thecodehub.ie/news. I post a new article every day before we start streaming, talking about what we're going to be looking at on the day, and it hopefully gets you set up for downloading any playgrounds you need to download or any apps that you have to download, like when we work back with learning variables, when we learn about variables. There's still time to go post on the survey to get some input on what we're going to be teaching next. The Twitter poll is closed. I'll talk about that at the very end of the session today. But for now, let's jump over to the iPad and let's get cracking on some Swift Playgrounds. All right. So we're back over here on the iPad. I can open up Playgrounds right away. We've been through books. We went through the last section of the Everyone Can Code Puzzles books yesterday. We talked about some of the places you might go from here. We're going to go somewhere else, but we'll show you at the end of the session here today. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to those exercises that I asked you to do earlier, and I'm going to go to Learn to Code 2. This is my copy 3. You can tell we've done this a few times. Okay, so we had a look at these appending removed values. The last playground that we actually worked on was the fixing index out of range errors. So let's go look at this one, appending to an array, because that was one of the ones that I asked you to look at last night. And I'm sure you all listened and you all went off and ran through these exercises. But let's work on it again, because this is a fairly common pattern we'll see with our code. We'll have maybe two arrays. You can think of them as two buckets or two lists. Like a to-do list and then a done list. You might want to keep a record of, okay, cool, I've already gone through and I've added the strawberries to my recipe. I've added the sprinkles. I've added the chocolate syrup. We don't want to add them again. So maybe we would have two different arrays to keep track of what we've done and what we haven't. All right, so in this case, we're going to append to an empty array based on coordinate properties. So here we go. Adding each item to an array individually is really repetitive. So what if we could create a set of rules for the coordinates to include in our array? So we're going to start with all coordinates, which we explored a couple days ago, last week, where we got all the possible coordinates for a world. So every single point on this particular map. So 0, 7, 0, 0, 7, 0, and 7, 7. All and everything in between. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with that. We're going to create an array out of that. Or actually, we're just going to refer to that array. Then we're going to create an empty array to add our coordinates to. Okay, so this we talked a little bit about on Friday. So here's the array that we create. It's called var block set. which maybe isn't the most clear name, because we want to name it after something that sort of explains its purpose. But block set will do fine because it's a set of blocks. That's fine. So we have this little colon. So when we declare a property, and we don't quite know what it's going to be yet, especially with an array. This is an empty array. Remember these two brackets here. We have to tell it what kind of type we're going to store in that array, what type of bucket we're going to have to hold these things in. Well, in this case, since our other array here is an array of coordinates, we're going to have another array. We're going to put those coordinates into another array that's got a type of coordinate for the items. Okay, so that's fine. That's a little extra bit of syntax we have to know when we're setting up properties and maybe we don't know what the value is at this stage. Okay, because we're declaring an array, and you can see here just a piece of code that creates something new when we declare something. So we're saying here, they give a good example of let planet equals Earth. So we're declaring the variable planet. All right, so here we go. It mentions the colon after the variable name to tell you what type it is. If we had a variable that we didn't know the value of it yet, but we were going to collect it later and it was a string, we would do the same thing. Instead of having it in these brackets, we would just have my string that's coming later, and then it'd be a colon, and it'd say string here. We'll show you an example of that in a second. Okay, cool. So this is new locations. Find the iterate over all coordinates and check the column and row properties of each coordinate. So they've given us some rules to follow here. So if the column property of a coordinate is greater than 5, or its row property is less than 4, append it to your empty array. Okay, well, we know about appending because that's a method on arrays that we learned about yesterday. But this, if I read this over again, if the column property of a coordinate is greater than 5 or its row property is less than 4, that kind of sounds like the logical operators chapter that we worked through, right? So let's try writing that. Oh, actually, you know what? They've already done it for us. So we're checking here. There's a comment that says check for coordinates with a column greater than 5 or a row less than 4. So this little symbol here, you may have seen this in your own math class. This means greater than. So the column, we want it to be greater than 5. If column is greater than 5, this statement here will evaluate to true. In this case, if row is less than 4, that statement will evaluate to true. And we know because that's a Boolean, what does it evaluate if it's greater than 4? If row is 5, for example. Or even if it's 4, because that's equal to 4. That's not less than. This would be false. Okay, so that's cool. So for coordinate and all coordinates, if the coordinate column is less than 2, this is not quite matching the text there, is it? Well, let's implement the code here because there's append coordinate to block set. So let's do that anyway. So to append something to our block set, we would use the block set property or variable. We say block set and we use dot notation. So we hit the dot. Now we can say append. And because we said that block set is an array with items of type coordinate in it, our autocomplete knows that it's looking for a coordinate here. So what we can do is we've done a test and we said, okay, well, in this case, if the coordinate column is greater than 2 and the row is less than 5, we're going to fall into this block. So that coordinate is, remember, every time we iterate through, there's a whole list of coordinates, all of these coordinates here. Every time we're going to loop through, we're going to assign the next one we're evaluating to this variable here, this coordinate variable. And that's what we're checking to see if its column is greater than 2 or if it's less than 5. So let's append the coordinate. If we fall into this condition, then we'll append that coordinate. Okay, and then afterwards, what does it say? For each coordinate in block set, place 6 blocks. Okay, well, cool. So we'll say that, well, the array that we want to loop through is block set, right? So we'll say for item in block set, we want to place 6 blocks. So we'll say, remember how we place blocks? We say world dot place. We don't want to do the facing one. We just want the item. So we want to place a block at, well, we have to name our coordinate. So what are we going to name it? We could call it coordinate like we did above. So let's do that. Now you might say, hang on a second. We have coordinate up here and then we have coordinate defined down here. Isn't that going to be a problem? Well, let's try. Let's check it out. So we're going to place a block at coordinate. In fact, it's just to place 6 blocks. So you know what? We're going to do that. We're going to do a for loop for I in 1 to 6. We're going to tap on this thing here and drag our code in. All right, does that make sense if we walk through this code here? So for each coordinate in block set, we're going to place 6 blocks. So we're going to start in this loop and we're going to say, okay, so I'm looping through my block set. I don't know how many blocks I'm going to have in there, but for every single one of them, I'm going to do the following 6 times. I'm going to place a block at that coordinate. So I think this will compile. Let's try running it. Okay, cool. There's one. And let's see if we tap on that column, it's 2, 0. So the coordinate column is 2 and the row is 0. 3, 4, 5. So there's 6. Okay, we're doing the next one. So our, let's see, not quite sure this is what I want it to be. We're still going, we're still adding our blocks. Here we go with our next row. And our next one. So we're only running this code on the items in the array here that satisfy these conditions. So where the column is greater than 2 and the row is less than 5. So now we're starting on tree 3. Where do you think this is going to stop? Can you guess? Can you think ahead where this might stop? Okay, we're starting our row here, 3, 4. So 4 is our row. These are our columns here. The third column, you can see that these columns didn't get anything because the column was not greater than 2. Okay, so we finished running our code. We got a big block there. We didn't get a congratulations message, so we didn't succeed. Okay, so here it says that straight off the bat that we can't just take this for granted. Because also, if we look at what they're asking us to do up here, if the column property of a coordinate is greater than 5, or the row property is less than 4, that doesn't match the actual code that's written. The comment checks out, right? We're looking for a column greater than 5 or a row less than 4. So let's see. It says here that we're not doing what we said to do up above and in the comment. So we also have to think about which logical operator we're using. If we use the and, then both of these have to be true. If we use the or, either one can be true. So okay, so this part we're doing, if a coordinate meets the condition of your if statement, append it to the block set array. Okay, so we're doing that part. Okay, after we've done that, iterate over the array. We're doing that down here. And then there's the solution. Let's not look at that yet. All right, so let's change our logic. So if the column is greater than 5, or if the row is less than 4, so let's change those numbers so they match the comment anyway. And then this and doesn't match the comment, right? We want to have an or. So remember, the or is kind of hidden here over the A. So we drag down, tap the A and drag down. And now let's try running our code. Okay, so if I tap on that 0, 0, okay, well that column is not greater than 5, but the row is less than 4. Same over here. We're getting a much different pattern than we saw last time because we've got that or logical operator in there. Okay, there we go. The next row. And while we're looking at that, let's look at the hints and let's compare our solution. Let's see. So if coordinate.column is greater than 5, there's our or logical operator. We've got our coordinate row less than 4. Excellent. That looks very similar to our code here. So I think we've done our job. Now to come back to this might be a little bit confusing because these two coordinates in these two loops are the same. That coordinate only sticks around long enough in between these two braces. Remember when we did our reading code tactics movie, we talked about following the braces. So when I'm looking at this code, I want to drop into my for loop. I'm going to check these braces. I'm going to say, okay, great. Anything in here I'm going to focus on for until I'm done with this iteration. And then I'm going to get in here and say, all right, well, I've got these two tests I want to run. And if they're true, then I want to run everything inside these two braces. So that's where I'm going to append my coordinates to the block set. And then I'm going to fall out of there, go back up to the top, run this code again. Now, once I'm done with this, this coordinate variable is done. I'm done with it. So I can actually declare a new one here in my for in loop. And there's lots of fun you can have with these kind of things much later on. If you follow the app development with Swift videos that I'll be doing shortly, you'll see a little bit more of this. It's a lot more in depth. We use Xcode on the Mac, but it's the same principles. The code that you've learned here will translate over to the Mac really well. All right, so our code's still running. You can see we've got a big dent here because if we look, the rows are all not less than 4, right? Because we're at the fourth row. So great, we've finished this one. Now this is a bit more involved, but this is something we might want to test. We might want to run a test like that and say, okay, cool. Well, when I'm building my world programmatically, and that's basically what we've done here is we built a world with extra blocks programmatically. We might want to say, well, for column 5 or for a certain area, if the column and row match a certain condition, I only want to have I want to have a little hill there, so I'm going to build up a few more blocks, or I'm going to add stairs, or maybe I'll add water for that particular area. All right, cool. So we finished the appending to array. Hopefully, if you tried that out, your solution matches roughly what we have. Now let's try appending removed values. This was the other bit of homework that I assigned you guys yesterday. All right, so the goal here is to remove coordinates from one array while appending to another. All right, so sometimes we'll want to use an item that you remove from an array. Fortunately, the removed item is stored for a short time, so we can assign it to a variable or append it to another array. This is a little bit like that to-do list, done list scenario I was talking about. You know, if you say, okay, cool, I've got to go rake the leaves, it's on my to-do list. Well, once you're done raking the leaves, you want to move it over to your done list, if only to show other people and say, oh no, look, I did it, I raked the leaves. So that's a little bit like what we might track here with Swift with our arrays. So if we look here, we can say, and actually we have a little bit of a typo. So, well, what we do here is, actually, let me just take a look here. So if what we're doing is we're getting the right column from the world. We're saying world column 7. Give me the one at column 7. And then we're saying new array, append to the right column. Sorry, append to the new array the item we're removing from the right column. All right, well, let's try this out. Let's see this in action. Maybe that's not super clear. So in the code above, it says the coordinates appended to the new array is the one that's also removed from right column. Well, let's see how that works, actually. So right column is initialized with a method. So this world instance that we've been calling the place method on, has some other methods too. So you can ask for the row, you can ask for the column. These are kind of handy ones, as it says here, that you can create an array of all the coordinates in that particular row or column. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to create one empty array of coordinates and use a method to create another array of all coordinates in row 2. Okay, so let's do that. Let's create an empty array of coordinates. So we're going to say it's going to be a variable. And we're going to say, we'll just call it coordinates. So we're not sure what we're going to do with those yet. And it's going to be empty. So what are we going to do? We'll use this autocomplete down here. Square brackets, remember, are for an array. And we'll have it be empty. Now, remember, in the last playground page, we had to, if we try running this, well, if we try running it, it's going to have a lot of problems. But it doesn't know what is in this array. So let's tell it the type of items we want to capture in there. Let's go over to the end of coordinates. We're going to add a colon. So that's over here over the K. And I'm going to add a space. And I want this to be an array of coordinates. So we're going to use the square brackets here over the H. So I'm going to touch on the H and drag down to the right. And then inside those brackets, I'm going to put coordinate. So now I've created an empty array that's going to hold coordinates for me. Now up here, the second item in step 1 was to use a method to create an array of all coordinates in row 2. So let's call that something useful. So let's say var row 2 coordinates. And now we're going to assign those coordinates. Remember, we just saw up here that we can call world dot row and give a number in there. So let's try that one out. So we're going to assign it. a value. So we'll say equals. So over the D key, there's the equal sign. So just tap on D and drag down. So now we want to say call the method on world. So we would say world dot. Well, we want a row, right? So we'll start typing row. It comes up in the autocomplete bar. Anywhere I can, as maybe you've seen throughout this course, I try to use that autocomplete bar just to save myself typing and also to save myself making mistakes. The autocomplete bar knows what it wants to autocomplete to. Use the tool that's available to you. Instead of typing it all out and maybe getting a typo in there somewhere, use the autocomplete bar. It'll make you code that a little bit faster. So we want to get all the coordinates in row 2. Okay, so we've done step 1. We've created one empty array of coordinates. So that's our empty array. I didn't call it empty array because I have a feeling we're going to fill it with stuff. And then use a method to create another array of all coordinates in row 2. So I said var row 2 coordinates because I know it's all the coordinates in row 2. And I said world.row2. Okay, so each time the outer loop runs, remove an item from the array. So I'm guessing row 2 coordinates and append it to our empty array. And then iterate over our empty array, placing an instance of type character at each coordinate. All right, well, let's try that. So we have a loop here. So we have a loop of 12 here. So the outer loop is going to run 12 times. We're going to remove. Now let's do this. We're going to create a variable called coordinate in row 2. So we'll use the row 2 coordinates. We're going to place a block at coordinate. And then here the comment says remove a coordinate and append it to your empty array. So let's remove let's try it out. Let's try removing, well, we have, well, let's just try it. Let's give it a shot. So we'll say, all right, cool, row 2 coordinates dot. Let's see. We have a few choices. We could remove first, remove last, remove all, remove at. What do we do? Will we remove? Let's try removing at, and then we'll use an index here. So the nice thing about using this loop here is we actually have another variable that will change throughout our whole time running this. So we have it for I in 1.12. So the first run will be 1, second run will be 2. So let's use I as our index into our array. So let's try that. Now this is going to be a new, we're going to have a reference to that coordinate we just removed. So we'll call it removed coordinate. So now we have I'll get rid of some of my extra stuff there. So it says var removed coordinate equals row 2 coordinates remove at I. So remember, it said above that when I remove something from an array, it actually tells me what item I just removed. So this is a handy way to work with arrays. You can say, oh, cool. Well, as I iterate through the array, I want to take it out because I'm done with that item on my to-do list. If we still keep thinking of it that way, then yeah, you want to take it off because you don't want to do the same thing twice. You don't want to rake the leaves twice. So, okay, so we have a reference to our removed coordinate. Now what we can do is let's append that to our empty array. So we're going to get our empty array, which is just called coordinates dot append, and we're going to append this removed coordinate. So now this is saying place a character for each coordinate added to your empty array. So let's see, let's try it out. So for item and array, this is going to be another array of coordinates that we're looping through. So we're going to call it coordinate. it's not empty coordinates. It should be full of stuff now. And now for each one of those coordinates that we removed from the other array, we're going to say world dot place, and we're going to place a character. So who will we pick? We'll just pick the generic one. All right, well, I think this does what it says we want to do. So iterate over our empty array, placing an instance of type character at each coordinate. Now it's not empty anymore, right? And if there were no items in here, none of this code would get run. We wouldn't place anything because we never placed anything in there. In fact, let's try that out. We're going to just comment out this line. So I'm going to go down to the C key and drag down twice. So now you can see my text turns green like these other comments. So if I hit run my code, I've not actually put anything in our empty array. So none of this code will get run. So let's try stepping through our code to watch it happen. There we go. We're in our loop for 12 times, placing a block. You can see us placing a block in the row 2 coordinates. So that's cool. That's working well. And we're going to do this 12 times. And then once that loop is done, then we're going to go down here and get this. I'm going to remove a coordinate. So for every single coordinate in row 2, we've gone down the whole length of it. And we're going to do this 12 times. Now, if we look, we missed a block there, right? Because we're looping through this row 2 coordinates. So what do you think happened? Well, down here, we removed a coordinate from row 2. And that first one was we zoom in so we can see a little better. 1, 2. Maybe you can't see that because I'm too close. So 1, 2. So we remove the coordinate at column 2. And look, you can see here we're starting our next row and we've done the same thing. We've kind of skipped over one. So you might see a pattern start to emerge here, and you might not think that it's a pattern you'd expect. You might expect that, well, we should actually have almost a stair effect. We shouldn't have this weird kind of every other block gets skipped type effect. We should see a more stair-like effect. But what we're seeing is that, well, we had the first one, that coordinate's gone. Now this one's gone. Now this one's gone. I'm guessing the next one will be this one. It's because we're changing this array as we're looping through it. And then coming as we're going through our loop and then coming back and then looping through that new changed array there. We're moving the index down. So as we're accessing the index is kind of changing the structure of the array. So we're actually skipping over one. So we'll never remove these guys at the rate we're going. Okay, so let's see. Let's try that. That's kind of interesting. So let's try running this faster and see if we can see how this plays out. Okay, all right, we had a little crash. So there's our arrays, and this is a problem with changing the contents of an array while you're looping through it in another loop. So if I look here, I got an index out of range error. So that's not very helpful. The last one I removed was here, 19, 2. Well, because I've been removing items from this array, it's actually gotten really small. So one thing I could do instead of removing an index is I could say, actually, let's use this. Let's remove first. And let's try running that faster. Okay, there's our first pass through the loop. Our second, oh, we're missing just the first one. Now we've got a more step-like pattern because we're just removing the first item. Okay, and what do you think is going to happen when we hit the end? Because we have more rows here. This actually goes all the way down to 19,2 for the number of columns. So there's 20 columns. So remember, it starts at 0. And now, that's it. It stopped running. It didn't crash. There's no index out of range here. But nothing happened here. I didn't place any characters at any of the coordinates because I wasn't adding anything to that coordinates array. So if I uncomment that, so I tap in front of it and get rid of the comments, let's hit run faster. And now, because I'm adding items to that coordinates array, we should get to run some code here and we'll place some characters at those coordinates. So let's run faster and check it out. All right, there we go. We're going over our row and we're taking away the first block, the first set of coordinates. And we're doing it 12 times. Now, how would you, as a challenge for yourself, how would you make it so that this set of stairs went all the way up to the top to the very end here? There's a couple of different ways you could do it, but I'd love to see your solution for it. Oh, and there we go. There's Byte hanging out on our steps. And here we go. We could have changed the name. So we could have said, okay, character Byte, blue, hopper. So not bad, not bad. But how would you do it if you wanted to get this all the way to the top? To the very end of this row? I'd love to see your solution for that. Then we can walk through a couple more of those tomorrow. So we'll come back to this appending remove values briefly tomorrow. And see how you've gotten on. All right, so next, what we're going to talk about very briefly is what we're going to be working on for the next couple of sessions. So far we've done all the everyone can code puzzle stuff. Now we're going to move on to a new set of challenges. Luckily, there's some really good Swift Playground challenges that we'll be working through.